Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me along. My name's Peter Swanton. I'm a Gamilaroi man. So I wasn't actually born in country. Mackay is in North Queensland. Gamilaroi country is sort of northwest New South Wales. And so I'm usually not giving these talks in 15 minutes. So how do you talk about 65,000 years of astronomy in 15 minutes? Well, I'm going to do it by showing you one picture. Because this is an image from Mount Stromlo Observatory in Canberra. This is where I work. Don't call me. But this is a lovely place, and this photo here is taken by Yuri Valetsky back in 2016. But there's actually so much of the night sky that we can see and talk about in this story here. And I want to talk about, firstly, one of the most prominent objects in the southern sky here, the Southern Cross. You know, it's on the Australian flag, the New Zealand flag. It's very well known, and it's always visible to us. And it's actually a fundamental constellation for Gamilaroi astronomy as well, because this is what we call a creation story. This story is the story of the first man to die on Earth. So in the beginning there were three people that lived on the Earth, and they were shown how to live off the Earth. They were shown the trees that would provide them with the food that they needed, the watering holes would provide them with the water and everything else that they needed in order to get by. But as the years went on, the Earth began to change. Those watering holes dried up, and the trees stopped providing the food that they needed. And it got to the point where one of the man and the woman, they were so desperate, they seen this wallaby hopping by. And they said, I want to kill and eat that wallaby, I'm so desperate for food. But the third man, he goes, you can't do that. The wallaby is our totem, we don't eat our totems. But the first man and the woman, they were so desperate, they killed and they ate the wallaby anyway. And this caused a lot of distress for the third man. And so he ran, and he ran, and he ran until he couldn't run anymore. And he fell at the base of the red gum tree, which in Gamilaroi we call Yaram, which is also our name for the Southern Cross constellation. And that's because there was a spirit that lived within the Yaram. And he saw that the man had done the right thing, that he hadn't eaten his totem. So he opened up the trunk of the tree, and took in the man's body, and he took the tree up into the sky. And as the tree faded into the background, all that were left were the eyes of the spirit and the eyes of the man, which make up the four main stars of the Southern Cross constellation. But as we can see in this photo, I've highlighted two other stars just below the Southern Cross. These are the pointer stars, and they're quite commonly associated with the Southern Cross. And in this story, that's because the Yaram was home to two white cockatoos. Seeing their home being taken up into the sky, they decided to chase it. And so if we look at the Southern Cross and these pointer stars throughout the year, we'll notice that they follow it across the sky as if these two white cockatoos are forever chasing their home across the sky. And so like I said, there are many variational sort of reasons why we tell stories within our culture. And these are the main ways in which we store and share our information. We are an oral culture. There is no written language until recently. And so, again, this starts with the story of creation. So this tells us how that Southern Cross came to be in the sky. Or it tells us why when we strike the red gum tree that it bleeds red, representing that blood of the first men to die on Earth. Or when we stand beneath the tree and the wind passes through, we hear that howling of the spirit that was within the tree. Another reason is these stories will tell us certain cultural or lore aspects of our society. So this tells us about death and why death is a natural part of our existence on country. And it also tells us about things about our burial law. So the importance of the Yaram tree in our funeral ceremonies. It can also tell us about our relationship with us as people in our greater environment. It tells us about our relationship with our totems, why we don't kill and eat our totems. And it also tells us about what happens to our spirit as we pass on into the afterlife through the trunk of the Yaram tree and up into the sky. And so as we tell these stories, we can really start to pack in a lot of information, and we tell those stories to the next generation of learners so that they then know the important information that needs to be passed on within our culture. Now the second story that I'd like to talk about makes a few important distinctions that are integral to Indigenous astronomy. Just beside the Southern Cross, we have the Coalsack Nebula, which is the head of the emu, or the kiwi, I guess, here in New Zealand. But this is a really important constellation, not only in Gamilaroi astronomy, which we'll talk about today, but there are many variations from many of the different communities around Australia. So for context, there are about 275 different language groups in Aboriginal Australia. So much more than the 7 states and territories that we have at the moment. And this one here is important because it uses those dark spaces between the stars. So here in the southern hemisphere, we've got the better skies. We've got that beautiful look into the center of the Milky Way galaxy. And all of that gas and that dust that's in the disk of the Milky Way blocks some of that light from getting to us here on Earth. And we use those dark spaces to make our constellations. And it also tells us about what we call interconnectedness. So that's this idea of what we see in the sky is reflected here on Earth. So we can use what we see in the sky to tell us what's happening here on Earth. And we do that with the Emu in the Sky story. So again, today I'm going to talk about Gawarragate, the celestial emu, the Gamilaroi version. And this starts with what we call the first appearance of the emu. So that's when we've got the emu and the Milky Way stretched right across the nighttime sky. And we can see it looks like an emu running, the emu in full sprint. So what this signified to us was the female emu chasing the male emu. So that's how we know it's the emu breeding season, and we can go out and we can hunt the emu eggs as a source of food. Then as the year goes on, the orientation of the emu changes. And as we come into the middle of the year, July going into August, we've now got the emu and the Milky Way pointed back down towards the Earth. And we can no longer see the legs of the emu at this point. And that's because now the male emu is sitting on the nest. So that's how we know while we can still collect the eggs for now, we need to stop hunting the eggs soon so that the emu population doesn't die out. Some of those eggs are able to hatch, and we have that sustainable food source for years to come. And then again, as we get quite late in the year now, coming into November, we've now got the emu and the Milky Way just above the western horizon. You can no longer see the head or the legs of the emu, just the body. And at this point, the emu's got its head in the watering hole. So that's how we know we've just had the spring rains. Our watering holes are now full, but we need to be prepared because the dry season is incoming. And then eventually, as we come into the new year, the emu and the Milky Way, they disappear below the horizon. The emus have left the watering hole. The watering holes are now empty. The dry season is here. And we need to wait for the emu to reappear once more. We start to see the head of the emu in February. The neck and the body start to come in March. And then in April, we have that beautiful full stretch of the emu once more. So again, there's lots of information we pack into this, things about seasons, wet seasons, dry seasons, keeping track of food, water, and other resources. There are certain orientations of the emu which tell us when certain ceremonies should be held, and they are actually also a navigational tool for helping us to remember how to navigate through the ceremonial grounds as well. So lots of really important information that we need to keep track of. Now, my background actually is not only as a Gamilaroi man, as an Aboriginal man, but I'm actually an astrophysicist. So I graduated with a Bachelor of Science where I majored in physics, specialised in astronomy and astrophysics, and actually started in black holes and cosmology. And I made the move over to cultural astronomy because I thought an Aboriginal person should be working in Aboriginal astronomy. And I said I can't say that without putting myself in and doing it myself, so that's how I ended up where I am. But I've actually come full circle. I get to talk about some really cool scientific observations. And one of those is an example from the Kakafa people in South Australia, which uses some of these constellations you might be familiar with. So in the bottom left-hand corner, we have the Pleiades cluster, one of the most observed constellations in cultures all around the world throughout history. And then on the right-hand side, it uses what we call the big saucepan in Australia, but in Greek mythology is known as Orion. Much like his Greek counterpart, this is also the story of a fearsome hunter named Nairuna. Now, Nairuna was a fearsome hunter, but he wasn't a very good man. He was a bit of a womanizer. One day he decides he wants to go out and he wants to marry one of the sisters from the Pleiades, or in this case they're called the Eugarilia. But not being a very good man, the sisters, they don't want anything to do with him. And so then he decides that he's going to go and try and trick one of them into marrying him. So each night he goes out and he lays out some traps and he sets out some food to try and lure one of the girls in. But the sisters, they're much more clever than he is and they would never fall for any of his silly tricks. But regardless, night after night he goes out and tries. And it gets to the point where the elder sister, Kambuga, she's had enough. And she doesn't think that Nairuna is this fearsome hunter as he so claims. She actually thinks he's a bit of a coward. So she stands up to him and is represented by the bright, sort of the object in the middle, of the Pleiades and Orion, the star cluster in the middle called the Hyades cluster. You might notice the V shape from Taurus, the bull story. She begins to taunt Nairuna and won't let him get past, won't let him get to her sisters. And of course this angers Nairuna because no one should dare stand up to him. And in his anger he raises his club, and his club is filled with fire magic. And that's represented by the bright red star on the right hand side of the screen here. This is a star called Betelgeuse. Betelgeuse is what we call a variable star. So stars that can vary their brightness quite significantly over astronomically short periods of time. So not like our sun, thankfully. Our sun isn't a variable star. That would be quite catastrophic for us here. But these stars are very important in our understanding of why these stars can vary their brightness. And so as Nairuna begins to anger, his fire magic flares as Betelgeuse begins to get much, much brighter. But Kambugata shares fire magic of her own, represented by the bright red star in the middle of the screen, Aldebaran. And as she returns fire, Aldebaran begins to flare. And of course, being the coward that she believed him to be, Nairuna begins to retreat. And as he retreats, his fire magic wanes as Betelgeuse begins to get much, much dimmer. And at this point, Kambugata puts out a line of dingo puppies, represented by the line of stars in the middle of the screen, which is the shield of Orion. And the fact that they're puppies is meant to be humiliating, because why would dingo puppies be any problem for a fearsome hunter such as Nairuna? And of course, this angers him once more. And as he angers, his fire magic returns as Betelgeuse begins to get much, much brighter. But this time, Kambugata, she calls on the father of the dingo puppies, Bubba. And Bubba comes in and starts tearing away at the midsection of Nairuna. And we see a twinkling of the stars in the Pleiades cluster as the sisters laugh at the humiliation of Nairuna. Now, when we tell these stories, we tell them for many reasons. So for the Kakatha people, we also like to instill certain values within our young learners as we're learning the stories as well. So this tells us a lot about the ways in which we should and shouldn't treat women within our society. It tells us about the bravery of the elder sister in standing up for her younger siblings that couldn't yet stand up for themselves. And so this is the fundamental area in which we can look at the scientific applications of how we can use Indigenous astronomy to inform the ways in which we do things in Western science. And then I'll finish on this one here because it's demonstrated quite well with this image, but in the bottom left-hand corner we've got a whole bunch of light pollution from Canberra. And so I looked at the light pollution impacts that it would have on the Milky Way. So there's two different methods. The one used empirical observations, which was a report from the Paris Observatory, and then also the light pollution propagation software from Felke and that in 2016. They both came up with that 20 to 20.6 magnitudes per arc second squared required to be able to see the Milky Way galaxy features. They also went on to show that only 2 to 5% of Australia's population actually lived in an area where they can see the features of the Milky Way from their own backyard, despite the fact that probably 95 to 98% of our country is dark enough to be able to see it. Most of our population is centred in areas like Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne, where you just can't see those features themselves. So that's all I have. Thank you.